Nancy Pelosi walked into the hearing room talking, but it took exactly 15 seconds for Tulsi Gabbard to unravel her 4-decade career. What followed in that hearing room was an unraveling conducted in the precise language of declassified files. It would take Nancy Pelosi 40 minutes to lose her cadence and 43 minutes to lose her hand, but it took her exactly 15 seconds at the start of the morning to make the one mistake that began it. She had walked into the room talking, she should have walked in listening. Director Gabbard, with all due respect, Nancy Pelosi began, and the smile she wore was the one she had perfected over 40 years of telling people they were wrong while appearing to thank them. You have served this country honorably. The whole nation is grateful for your service in uniform, but service is not the same as understanding. She turned a quarter degree toward the cameras and to the people watching this morning on the small screens in their living rooms in Ohio and Idaho and the Carolinas. I would simply suggest that the rural mythology about Washington has very little to do with the actual work of governing, the work I have done, the work my colleagues have done, the work that has kept this republic upright while soldiers like the director, however brave, were elsewhere. Tulsi Gabbard did not answer right away. She sat at the witness table in a dark suit, a thin red folder closed in front of her, both hands resting flat on top of it. 2 service ribbons were pinned, small and quiet, to the lapel of her jacket. They were the only thing in her presentation that referred to where she had been before this room. She wore the bearing of an officer who had once stood at attention longer than this opening speech, in heat, with a weapon. She was not bored, she was waiting. When she finally spoke, her voice was clean, and even the cadence of an analyst reading a finding. Madam Speaker, you said 3 things just now. You said service is not understanding. You said the people watching at home live in a rural mythology, and you said soldiers like me were elsewhere while the real work got done. She opened the red folder to the first page. The black bar of a declassification stamp ran diagonally across the top. The words Top Secret Orcon Noforn crossed through in a single straight line. I will take each of those in order with documents. I am not going to raise my voice. I am not going to need to. The work this morning is on paper. She set her palm flat on the open page. July of 2017, you are at a microphone on the Capitol steps. You are the Speaker Designate of the House Democratic Caucus, and you tell the American people, and I am quoting you, that the intelligence community has, in your words, spoken unequivocally on the question of Russian interference. Do you remember saying that? Madam Speaker, Pelosi's hand did not move yet. The conductor's right hand was still in command, hovering at the level of her chin. I remember leading my caucus through a difficult period for this country with the seriousness it required, Director, which is not the same question as the one you. It is a simple question. Did you say the intelligence community had spoken unequivocally, yes or no? Yes, in the context of a moment in which, thank you, Tulsi turned the page. Then I am going to take you at your word, Madam Speaker. Before this hearing is over, I am going to show this committee what the intelligence community actually said in writing while you were telling the country it had spoken unequivocally. I am going to show you a process you ran on intelligence. Your own committee was caught coordinating in advance. I am going to show you a smear against an American veteran you had every opportunity to end with one sentence and chose not to. And at the end of all of that, I am going to show you a number. She paused, exactly long enough for the room to hear that the pause was deliberate, 70. The smile held something behind it, began to recalculate. If you just watched a sitting director of national intelligence open a red folder in front of a 4-decade speaker and promise her a number, hit that like button now. We are only on the first page. In the back rows, 11 men and women in plain dark suits sat very still. They were veterans, every one of them, although nothing in their clothing said so. They had come for one reason, and were not yet sure they would need to do anything other than watch. For the first time that morning, Nancy Pelosi's right hand drifted slowly down to the leather memoir at her elbow and rested on it. Carter Page is not why I am sitting here, Madam Speaker, Tulsi said. He was the easy example for someone else's morning. The harder example is what happened in the rooms where the assessments were actually written, so that is where I would like to start. She took out the second page. The declassification bar across the top was thick and recent. In December of 2016 and into January of 2017, a small group of analysts at the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation were tasked with producing what we call an intelligence community assessment. It is the most senior unclassified product the IC publishes. It is supposed to reflect the collective analytic judgment of 3 agencies. She read from the page. This is an internal email written by one of those analysts, dated the 4th of January, 2017. The analyst writes, and I am quoting, that the underlying tradecraft does not support the level of confidence senior leadership has requested be assigned to the central judgment. She looked up. In English, Madam Speaker, they were being told what to find before they had finished looking. A small ripple moved through the press tables. This was not one analyst's complaint. There are 7 of them across 2 agencies in the file I am holding. Their concerns were not addressed. The confidence levels were upgraded. The assessment was published, and within 72 hours of that publication, you were at that microphone on the Capitol steps telling the country the intelligence community had spoken unequivocally. The phrase you used was, your words again, all roads lead to Russia. That was your line. That was your caucus line. That was the line for 3 years. The judgment of the IC was the judgment of the IC. Director, I am not a... You said unequivocal. Tulsi did not raise her voice, she narrowed it. Unequivocal is a word with a meaning, Madam Speaker. Unequivocal means not contested. The assessment you cited was contested in writing by the people who wrote it before it left the building. You knew that, or more carefully, the briefings provided to senior congressional leadership during that period are also in this folder, and they included the dissents. I am not telling you what you should have known. I am telling you what was put in front of you. Pelosi shifted in her chair almost imperceptibly. The conductor's hand was still on the memoir, but it had begun to tap just once with the index finger. You ran the most powerful caucus in the United States Congress, Madam Speaker, and in your hands, the careful, qualified, internally disputed judgment of a small group of intelligence analysts became, on television, an unequivocal verdict. You were the amplifier. You did not write the assessment. You did not need to. The country never read the assessment. The country watched you on the steps, and the country believed you because for half a century you were the woman they had been told to believe. She set the page down. Those analysts were treated in the calculus of your caucus as assets. They were not. They were professional officers of the United States government doing their job. You appropriated their conclusions and discarded their qualifications. That is the first thing I have on this paper this morning. The intelligence community is not above scrutiny, Director. I welcome a fulsome. I am not scrutinizing them, Madam Speaker. I am scrutinizing what you did with them. That silence is the sound of a 4-decade speaker getting handed a paper trail in her own briefing record. If a moment like that is worth your time, type the word asset in the comments so we know to keep going. A reporter in the second row finished typing a sentence, read it once, gathered her bag, and walked toward the back doors. She did not return. Tulsi did not watch her go. She was already turning to the 3rd tab. Now, while that assessment was being published, while you were on those steps, there was a separate conversation happening in your Speaker's office about a phone call. September of 2019, Madam Speaker, a complaint about a phone call between the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine becomes the basis for the first impeachment of a sitting president in over 20 years. You ran that impeachment. You announced the inquiry. You stood at a podium and said, and I am quoting, that the truth was marching on. That was your line. That was the line of your floor leadership. That was again the line for the duration. She turned the page. And in the very first weeks of that inquiry, the chairman of the committee you handed it to, your colleague Mr. Schiff, stood at a microphone and was asked a plain question. Had his staff had contact with the whistleblower before the complaint arrived? He said no. It was not true his staff had been in contact before the complaint. The House later censured him for it formally by a recorded vote, 213 to 209, 3 years later after the damage. She let that sit a moment. Now, Madam Speaker, I am not asking you to take responsibility for another member's words. I am asking about the process, because the process was yours. You announced it, you assigned it, you defended it on every network in this country, and when in the early weeks the question was raised whether your designated chairman had been straight about the origins of the complaint, you stood in front of the cameras and you said, your words, that the question was, quote, beneath the dignity of this chamber. You called it a distraction. You said the truth was marching on. You moved the process forward. She closed the tab and folded her hands on the folder. You did not have to do that, Madam Speaker. You had options. You could have paused. You could have asked. You could have demanded from your own committee chairman an answer the country deserved before the proceedings escalated. You chose not to. You chose to drive the train. And 3 years later, your own House voted on the record that the man at the front of that train had not told the truth about how it left the station. Tulsi looked up. That is not partisan history. That is the recorded vote of the chamber you presided over. She turned one more page. And there is one more thing the country was not told at the time. You did not put the impeachment inquiry to a vote of the full House when you announced it. You announced it on your own authority at a podium in the Capitol on the 24th of September 2019. Every prior modern impeachment inquiry, Nixon, Clinton, had begun with a recorded vote authorizing the inquiry. You skipped that step. You did not give your own members the opportunity to be on the record, for or against, before the story took on the weight of an institutional proceeding. By the time the formal authorizing vote was held 5 weeks later, the country had been told for 35 days that the inquiry was real. The procedural shortcut was a choice, Madam Speaker. It was your choice. It is in the parliamentary record of this House. Director, with all due, I would like to be careful here, because I am a careful person, and the words matter. Tulsi did not interrupt loudly. She continued through. You did not bend a process, Madam Speaker. You blessed bending it every time it served your caucus. You blessed it. That is the difference between a leader and an operator. A leader bends to the truth. An operator bends the truth to the schedule of the next news cycle. For 40 years, this country thought it was watching a leader. Some of us have started to wonder when it was actually watching an operator. This morning is one way we are finding out. Here it was. The first time the analyst S-Com had given way to something with an edge in it. The room had grown quiet. Even Pelosi's tapping finger had stilled briefly on the leather memoir before resuming. In the back of the gallery, Madam Speaker, there are 11 men and women in dark suits. Most of them did not know each other before this morning. They are veterans of the armed forces of the United States. Some of them voted for you, some of them have never voted for a Republican in their lives. They came because they wanted to see what an Iraq war veteran would say to the woman who ran the chamber that smeared American veterans as agents of foreign governments. She did not turn to look at them. They are very patient men and women. They will wait. If you have ever sat at your kitchen table and felt like the serious people in Washington were telling you a story that did not match what you knew with your own eyes, this is the morning you have been waiting on. Subscribe right now, because the next page is the page that was never supposed to come out of a folder. An aide leaned in toward Pelosi and whispered something fast into her ear. For the first time all morning, the speaker did not appear to hear it. Tulsi opened the fourth tab. In October of 2019, the former Secretary of State of the United States, your former colleague and longtime ally, sat for a podcast interview and described a sitting Iraq war veteran and member of the United States House of Representatives as, quote, a Russian asset. The veteran was me, Madam Speaker. The interview is in the public record. The transcript is in this folder. She set the page down. I want to say what I am not doing. I am not asking you to answer for someone else's words. I am not asking you to apologize for a podcast you were not on. I am asking about your silence. She turned half a degree toward the cameras. Because for 6 years after that interview, you were the most senior elected Democrat in the country. You appeared on every major network. You gave thousands of statements, and you were asked repeatedly on the record whether you agreed with that characterization of a sitting American veteran by a member of your party. You declined to answer it. You called it a matter for Secretary Clinton to address. You said you would not relitigate her comments. You said it was a private exchange on a private podcast. It was none of those things. It was a label applied by the most powerful Democrat of her generation to an American who had worn the uniform, and every time you were asked, you walked past it. Tulsi did not raise her voice. That silence had a cost, Madam Speaker. Editors quoted it. Panelists repeated it. Primary opponents ran on it. The word followed me into rooms I had earned the right to enter. It cost me a presidential primary. It cost me the company of people who had served beside me. You did not write the smear. You were just the one person on this earth who could have ended it with one sentence on one Sunday morning, and in 6 years, you never did. The asset. The word landed the second time, and the room felt it. And then Nancy Pelosi did the thing she had not done all morning. She found her footing. The conductor's hand came back up off the memoir, and the voice came back with it. And for 30 seconds, it was the voice that had moved bills and broken speakers and survived everything Washington could send at her. I will not be lectured on loyalty by a junior officer who walked away from her own party the moment it cost her a primary, she said, and the cadence was full and certain. I served this country before you were born. I shepherded the Affordable Care Act through this Congress on a margin you would not have understood at 21. I built majorities, I lost majorities, I rebuilt them. I never once used the word asset to describe you, Director. I do not control the speech of every former colleague in my party. I will not be held responsible for the worst hot take of a podcast guest because you needed a villain in a pantsuit to make the math of your day work out. And as for what is on the rest of those pages, I can guess what is coming. My husband's investments are public. They are legal. They are conducted at arm's length from any committee work I have ever done. I dare any prosecutor in this country, in any administration, to bring the charge you are insinuating in this room. I do not need the lecture, Director. I have earned the right not to. It landed genuinely. The Democratic side of the panel made a sound, low, almost a hum. A staffer behind Pelosi straightened. One of the younger members on the dais nodded once and caught himself. For about 30 seconds, the room remembered that this was Nancy Pelosi, and she had broken bigger mornings than this one. Somewhere behind the press tables, a voice said quietly, "She's not wrong about Hillary." And in that moment, she wasn't. She wasn't wrong about Hillary, and she wasn't wrong about the bill, and the room knew it. Tulsi did not flinch. When a senior witness finally throws the punch she has been loading all morning, an officer does not swing back. She lets the room hear it. Then she answers it. "Madam Speaker," she said, after the moment was over, "I did not say you used the word I said. You stayed silent on it. You were asked repeatedly. You were asked on national television. You were asked in print. You were asked by reporters in this very hallway. I have the transcripts, they are, in this folder. Every time for 6 years you declined to repudiate the use of that word against an American veteran by a member of your party. You did not have to control her speech, you had to use your own, and you chose not to. That is not a hot take, Madam Speaker. That is the recorded silence of the most powerful Democrat in the country for 6 years on a label applied to a soldier." She closed the page. "And before you ask, Madam Speaker, I am not relying on my own count. The transcripts of the questions are in this folder. So is the article in Politico from December of 2019 inches, which a reporter described in print asking your office for a statement and being told the speaker had no comment. So is the segment from Meet the Press in February of 2020, where you were asked the same question on live television and changed the subject. So is the floor statement from August of 2021, where a member of your own caucus rose and asked the same question, and you ruled the question, your word, immaterial. The pattern is documented. It is not the work of one bad morning. It is 6 years on the record. If you have ever watched a powerful person say absolutely nothing while a smear they could have ended ran for years, Share this with one person who is still waiting on an apology that is not coming. The speaker has just told you what those apologies sound like. In the back rows, 2 of the 11 veterans stood up. They did not speak. They did not move forward. They just rose to their feet and remained there. A moment later, a third stood. The Capitol Police officer at the rear door watched and did not intervene because no rule had been broken. For the first time, Nancy Pelosi's hand left the conductor-S beat for good. It came down to rest on the leather memoir, fingers spread, and stayed there. You called this partisan, Madam Speaker, a junior officer with a personal grievance. Let me grant you something. Tulsi folded her hands on the closed folder. I have a personal grievance. I have stood at the receiving end of that word for 6 years. I will not pretend that is not in this room. I am telling you that nothing on these pages requires my grievance to be true. The pages were true before I read them. She looked up. The first set of dissents on the 2017 assessment was reported in real time in a book published by a journalist nobody in this room can call a Republican. Glenn Greenwald, a man who built his career exposing the security state and won a Pulitzer doing it, he wrote about it before I was a candidate for anything. Matt Taibbi, an avowed leftist, has been writing about the politicization of the intelligence cycle since the year you ran your first impeachment. Mike Morell, who served as acting director of the CIA under President Obama, has acknowledged in public on the record that the letter on the laptop in October of 2020 was a political product, not an intelligence product. None of these men work for me, Madam Speaker. None of them voted for the man who appointed me. They reached the same conclusions because the pages reached the same conclusions before any of us did. Pelosi's hand had not moved off the memoir. You spent 40 years in a town that taught you a single trick. When a question is hard, make the person asking it the story, their party, their motives, their backers. You are very good at it. You taught the rest of your caucus to do it. It is the one move that built every defense of every difficult morning you ever had. But it does not work on a number, Madam Speaker, and it does not work on a page in your own briefing record. I am not the story. I never was. I am the officer who happens to be holding the folder. The speaker said something then, almost too low for the microphone. You will have your moment, Director. Moments don't last. Tulsi did not look away. Neither do dynasties, Madam Speaker. The line landed quietly, and the room did not laugh because it was not a joke. The aide behind Pelosi looked at her phone and then at the floor. In the back row, 2 more veterans stood. There were 5 of them now on their feet, silent. And the Capitol Police officer at the door folded his hands in front of him and shifted his weight slightly, the posture of a man who has read a room. A staffer 2 seats behind Pelosi opened her phone, read something, and closed it. She did not lean in to whisper whatever the message said. She had decided the speaker did not need to hear it yet, and the speaker, for the first time all morning, had not asked. If a person in your life has ever told you that the truth was just one more opinion that powerful people argue about until everyone gets tired, turn on notifications right now. The next page is the page they have all been arguing around for 38 years. Madam Speaker, Tulsi said, we have talked about intelligence assets all morning. I would like, with the time the chairman has given me, to talk about the other kind. You entered this House in 1987, Madam Speaker. The salary at the time of your election was in current dollars approximately $174,000 a year. You have served 38 years. The arithmetic of your lifetime public compensation is on the first line of this exhibit. She turned the page. Your household net worth, by the most conservative public estimate available, is north of $200 million. That is not a number I am giving you. That is a range published by financial outlets that do this work for a living in the lower part of their estimate. Many estimates are higher, none are lower. She let the gap between the 2 numbers sit there. Now, I am aware, Madam Speaker, that you did not earn that on your salary. Nobody in this room thinks you did. The household figure is built almost entirely on the trading activity of your husband. Those trades are a matter of public record because the law requires them to be. Last year, his portfolio, by the published tracking of nonpartisan financial analysts who follow congressional disclosures for a living, returned approximately 70%. The benchmark S&P returned roughly 24%, 70 to 24. 3 years before that, the same portfolio returned approximately 65%. The benchmark returned roughly 19%. 70 is not an accident, Madam Speaker. It is not a hot streak, it is a record. The most consistent investor in the world, Warren Buffett, has compounded at about 20% across a 60-year career. Your household portfolio, in years when you happen to be Speaker, returned 3 times that. She read from the exhibit. Nvidia, Visa, Microsoft, Apple, Tesla. The Nvidia trades alone over the last 4 years returned in the 7 figures. The most discussed of them was a purchase of 1 to 5 million in Nvidia call options in July of 2022, filed under your husband's name, exactly 1 month before the Congress you led voted on the largest semiconductor subsidy in American history. The Visa trades coincided, by date of filing, with congressional consideration of payment processing regulation that would have directly affected the company's revenue. None of these is alleged in this folder to be a crime, Madam Speaker. None of them needs to be a crime for the country to ask the question they raise. She turned to another exhibit. And it is not only the timing, it is the direction. Your household's trades, the ones tracked by the nonpartisan analysts who watch this for a living, are correct in their direction roughly 70% of the time. The average professional fund manager beats the market less than half the time. Your household has done it for years on positions filed within weeks of votes you scheduled. There is a word for someone who is right that often on information that nobody else has yet. It is not lucky. Pelosi's hand moved on the memoir, the index finger lifting a 1/4 inch. The conductor trying one more time. My husband is an experienced investor, director, who has built his own career independent of mine over more than 50 years. He does not consult me on trades. I do not consult him on votes. The wall between our households is a matter of public legal record, audited by counsel, for every year I have been in this chamber. You can insinuate, you cannot prove. There is a reason no charge has ever been brought. You are correct, Madam Speaker. No charge has been brought. Tulsi did not look down. The reason no charge has been brought is the reason every member of Congress quietly understands the current statute does not require what would have to be proven. That is also a fact in the public record. It is the fact your caucus voted repeatedly to keep that way. Every time a bill to ban this kind of trading reached the floor of your House, it died there. Yours is the chamber that wrote the wall. Yours is the chamber that did not close the door behind it. Pelosi's hand had not moved off the memoir. You served 38 years in this House on a public salary. You walked out a fortune the size of a small bank. The arithmetic does not work, Madam Speaker. It has never worked. It works only if the work was not what the work appeared to be. She set the page down between them. You called me an asset. We just found yours. The mirror landed. The word, the 3rd time, did not need to be said again. It was sitting on every page. It was sitting on the leather memoir under Pelosi's hand. It was sitting in the gallery where 8 of the 11 veterans were now on their feet. Tulsi did not stop. And to the people watching this at home, because they are who this was really for, when the woman who told you for 40 years to trust the institutions of Washington walks out of this Congress richer than the bankers she was supposed to be regulating, there is one question you are supposed to ask. And it is the one she did not answer this morning. She turned a 1/4 degree toward the cameras. How does a public salary become a private fortune? That is the question. It is not partisan. It is not a hot take. It is a question every constituent in this country has the right to put to every representative they have ever sent here. And until the answer is something other than silence, the work of cleaning out this town is not done. For the first time, Nancy Pelosi tried to do the thing she had done in 1,000 rooms. She tried to pivot, with all due co. The cadence began, and the conductor's hand twitched 1/2 inch on the memoir and could not lift. With all due, she said again. And the voice, the famous patrician voice that had narrated 4 decades of American politics, thinned to something small, and the sentence did not finish. She tried a 3rd time and got further. Madam Director. It was the wrong title. She heard it as she said it, her eyes flickered. Major. It was the wrong title again. Her own famous procedural precision, the thing she had carried into this room as her armor, was deserting her in front of every camera in the country. She had been on her feet in rooms like this for longer than her questioner had been alive, and she could no longer choose the correct address. Sergeant. The fourth try did not even reach a verb. The right hand pressed down on the leather memoir, as if pressing it down were the same as standing up, and was neither. The microphone caught a small, dry swallow. No one in the room moved to fill the space. A heckler would have given her something to push against. A gavel would have given her cover. The room simply waited, 200 people holding very still, letting the silence belong for the first time in 40 years to her. There it is. There is the moment. Hit that like button one more time right now, because you just watched a 4-decade speaker lose the ability to choose a title for the woman across the table from her. Tulsi stood. It was the only time she stood all morning. At her full height, the room seemed to gather around her, and she did not look at Pelosi. She looked at the 19 people who were now on their feet at the back of the gallery. You came this morning because you wanted to hear the word you have lived under for years, said out loud. It is said now. It is on the record. There is nothing more I can give you in this room. She closed the folder. The rest of it belongs to the country now. The gavel came down, and afterward, no one could quite recall when the chairman had reached for it. This committee, the chairman said, and his voice was not quite steady, will refer the financial disclosure matters to the Office of Government Ethics and the appropriate federal authorities for review, and the matter of the 2017 assessment process to the Senate Select Committee for a closed session. We will stand in recess. It was the dry language of procedure, and in that silent room, it landed like a sentence. Pelosi's longtime counsel was at her shoulder now, a hand on her arm. The speaker had stopped trying to speak. She gathered the leather memoir off the table with both hands slowly, and could not seem to decide which side of the table to put it down on, and set it back where it had been. Around the room, the mourning came apart in small motions, which was worse than chaos would have been. 2 senior Democrats on the panel rose and left without looking at her. 3 more stayed and kept their eyes on their papers, because there is a particular kind of distance that looks exactly like taking careful notes. The press rows emptied, not all at once, but in waves, thumbs moving, the clips going out before anybody filed the story. In the back of the gallery, the 11 veterans had become 19. They were not 11 anymore. Other people in the room had risen and crossed the carpet to stand with them, men and women in business suits, some of them with small pins on their lapels. Nobody could read from the dais, and they were not all Republicans. By the time the chairman had finished the words about recess, there were perhaps 30 people on their feet at the back, silent, and the silence was the loudest thing in the building. A reporter near the press table said almost to himself, "She never answered the question." He said it the way a man says a thing the instant he understands it, about the trades. She never answered it. She gave us the speech, she didn't give us the answer. An older correspondent beside him, who had covered Pelosi since the second Bush administration, watched the speaker gather her counsel and her coat and said nothing for a while. Then, very quietly, "She used to do this to people. The patient question, the folder, the wait." He shook his head once. Strange thing, watching her sit on the other side of it. In the hallway outside, 3 former senior aides to the speaker, men and women who had built their entire careers under her wing, declined on the record to defend the mourning. One of them said, off the record, that the household trades had embarrassed the office for years, and that nobody around her had been willing to say so to her face. The reporter who heard it wrote it down and did not need to make a single call to confirm it. Tulsi was already packing the red folder into a plain leather case. She had not smiled once all morning. She did not smile now. A young analyst from her office leaned in and murmured that the clip of the last exchange was moving across platforms faster than anything the office had ever released, faster than they could measure, and the director only nodded the way an officer nods at a weather report. But before she left, she stopped at the edge of the witness table, and she turned back to the half-emptied room, and she said the thing the gallery would carry home and repeat longer than they would remember any document. For a long time, she said, A lot of you have had the feeling that the people in this town who told you to trust them had bought themselves a country club on your salary while you were paying attention to other things. You were not wrong. You were not the conspiracy theorists. You were not the deplorables. You were not the ones who didn't understand how Washington works. You were the ones who understood and were told you were too simple to be listened to. She looked at the empty chair across the table. That is the thing I came here to put on the record this morning. Not a person, a habit. The habit of being told that the costume of public service is the same as the substance of it. It is not. The salary is not the fortune. The cadence is not the truth. And no one, however senior, however gifted, gets to spend 4 decades calling other Americans assets and then act surprised the morning somebody finally opens the file on her own. She picked up the leather case. The work is not done. The folders are not closed. There are other rooms. There are other names. We will be in them. And then, in the manner of an officer with another appointment to keep, she walked out the side of the dais into the corridor, into the ordinary noise of a Wednesday in the Hart Senate office building, and was gone before the room had finished deciding what it had just watched. Behind her on the witness table, a leather memoir of 40 years sat closed, and a conductor S hand rested on it and did not move. By 2:00, the Speaker S office had released a statement, baseless, politically motivated, a revenge operation by an administration that had wanted her humiliated for years. The husband's investments, the statement noted, were public, legal, and disclosed under the law. It was a good statement, and it would have done its work the way every statement before it had, except for one thing: the country had already watched the video. In the video, the most articulate woman in American politics had been unable to choose a title for the officer across the table. The words on the page could not undo the silence of the room. By evening, the clip of the failed pivot had been watched more times than any congressional footage in the building's history. The defenders kept their sentences short. The critics ran the 70 and 24 side by side on a loop. No charge had yet been brought. The legal commentators reminded their audiences, which was true, and which did not seem to matter, because what broke in the room would never be settled in a courtroom. In a small house in Killeen, Texas, an Army veteran who had served 2 tours in Iraq watched the segment about the 11 men and women in the back of the gallery, and watched it become 19, and watched it become 30. He did not say anything to his wife about it. He simply sat in the kitchen for a while after she had gone to bed, and then turned out the light. In Reading, Pennsylvania, a woman who managed the breakfast shift at a diner watched her husband pull up the stock price of Nvidia on his phone while she made coffee, and watched him put the phone down. They had not bought any stock in their lives. They had paid into their pension every 2 weeks for 30 years. She did not say anything to him. There was nothing to say. In San Francisco, an analyst at a regional bank, a woman who had voted for Nancy Pelosi every time her name appeared on a ballot since she was 22, watched the segment on her phone during lunch. She did not finish her sandwich. She sat with her hands flat on the table for a long time. And what she felt was not anger exactly. It was the quiet of having spent 30 years defending someone who, it now seemed, had not been defending her back. The director gave no interview that day. When a reporter caught her in a hallway late that night and asked what she had hoped to accomplish, she said only that a woman had spent 40 years naming other people as assets, and had been very surprised this morning to be asked about her own. If a piece of this felt true to something you have been carrying for years, like it and subscribe so the next one finds you, and tell us in the comments whose file should get opened next.